You know, we do this every year, and a couple things come to mind. One, time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah.
Two, we're not getting any younger.
No.
No, we're not.
Nat St. Laurent asked me to come back. So I told him the only person undefeated in sports is Father Time.
Yes.
He was like, take your time. I was like, I don't have time.
But it also tells me there's some legs to the league now, and there's a foundation built. What gives you the confidence we could be having this conversation in 5-10 years?
Well, we have great investors. I think we have the best cap table in sports. People like Joe Tai, Arctos Group. We have the Crafts that are involved. We have Chernin Group. So having long-term capital is table stakes. It's what we don't often talk about in the NBA and the NFL, but those owners are in it for life. So we have lifers. Yeah. We don't rest on those sort of benefits of long-term capital, but it definitely gives us the juice to do things like this, to have a draft here in Bristol, to continue to do extraordinary things from production and innovation in the league. But I think in the end, we're betting that lacrosse fans all over the world are going to continue to show up and support the PLL, support the best players in the game, support those best players who were just playing in college in the Final Four and so on. That will be the driver of success into the future.
Speaking of fans, and I speak to a bunch, when I ask them about the PLL, the biggest question they have right now is the transition from the tour-based to the city-based model. And they always ask the same thing. How long will it take for that transition to be permanent, where my team, the New York Atlas, has a stadium, has a field, and we're not traveling to see them play?
Yeah, well, I think what has helped us reach a level of success where we're at today in professional lacrosse has been patience and a meticulous attention to detail. And we know that since 1990, there have been 200 pro sports leagues that have started with a 1% success rate, and that's based on your ability to sustain beyond 3 years. So starting out in tour was capital efficient, was beneficial to our network partners, our brand partners, our fans, and our players, having the controllables done well. Now we want to be in cities, but the touring model has still worked. So we're in that phase 2. Phase 3, what you're referring to, is certainly on our roadmap, but a few things have to fall into place. From a timing standpoint, I look at LA 28 as a big benchmark for lacrosse. And as lacrosse goes internationally, as lacrosse goes professionally, as lacrosse goes collegiately, we all move together. So if I were to, put a guess on paper of when you could potentially see that, it would be around the Olympic windows. We have to get the stadiums right, which means we could build our own stadiums, which means we could partner with existing stadiums, which means we could also bring on ownership groups that own stadiums. That's critical. If and when we're in home markets for a home and away traditional schedule, what that's going to give us as a league is leverage from a game day, from a tonnage standpoint. If players are in market, we could explore playing Tuesday nights and Thursday nights and Saturday nights, a little bit like the NBA. And all of a sudden, you're taking from a 14-week season to a 24-week season in the same window. So there's a lot of things that we can get as a league, but we've got to continue to get the financials right. We've got to continue to pace attention and viewership and social media audience size year over year. 27, 28 is that window.
In the interim, while the transition is taking place from tour-based to city-based, how can a young fan feel the presence of a player that he's rooting for, she's rooting for, that's in their market?
Yeah, well, we do a couple of things. I would start with being in market in the flesh. We view our team's activation at the league level through a group called Shield Team. They're essentially our Red Bull Wings team, where they're living in Boston and New York and Philadelphia and Maryland and Carolina and Utah and Denver and California. We have some players on each team that are actually living in those markets. We have our PLO Play business, which is running boys and girls youth programs in those markets. And then we're flying players in on a monthly basis to do community events and appearances. We just did one in Utah for their Utah Sports Commissions Awards. a few weeks ago, where we bought a table for the Utah Archers, and they had a great time interacting with the Jazz and the inbound NHL team. So that's the operational side. And then I would say why the tour model has worked for us, going back to the recipe of launching in 2018, is that media has become national and global. You know, in the past, you couldn't watch, if you lived in Maryland, the Golden State Warriors play. Yeah. And then the NBA Pass comes and streaming comes. So as a result, you've seen more fans that don't go to Golden State Warriors games becoming Golden State Warriors fans. Good point, yeah. So we get that connectivity for all of our teams right now. Every week, you'll be able to watch your home team play. And the reality is, under 5% of sports fans that live in a market actually go to games. Wow. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like, you know, you have Rangers fans. Yeah. Most of them watch on TV.
Yeah, I'm a Yankees fan. I've only been to the park probably 2 or 3 times the last 10 years.
I mean, look, and I want people to come to our parks. Yeah. But, you know, you understand the balance of the attention economy and the event experiential space. Yeah.
Sixes in February was off the charts. It was at an all-time high, like in terms of gas, right? Yeah. You also had the women's sixes down there. Describe the PLL's commitment to women's lacrosse moving forward.
Well, we've had a commitment to Charlotte North since she graduated from BC. We run events with her through PLL Play, and we've brought her to bigger PLL events, and I view Charlotte North as our sports Caitlin Clark. There are a number of other women that we've worked with as well, but I say that because our touch point to the players of the women's game has been that of our touch point to the men. And if we look to continue to grow women's professional lacrosse, we're going to invest in the players first, think about markets, think about properties like our championship series, distribution like we have here with ESPN. And it's a very sizable endeavor, but I've always believed that women's professional lacrosse has great upside, and as challenging as it was to figure out the men's game, it will be challenging to figure out the women's game. It just always is. Pro sports is hard. I think that it would be a safe bet to believe we will only expand our investment into women's pro lacrosse.
One of the hot topic conversations over the last couple years has been the shot clock, right? 52 seconds off of a face-off win, 32 seconds. Yeah. What's your reaction or your response to someone saying, Paul Rabil, it is a competitive disadvantage to win a face-off?
Well, if the data shows that, then we've got to change the rules. The data doesn't show that. The data shows that teams on average are scoring anywhere from 20 to 25% on first possession off of a face-off. So the question is, are you more interested in defending and 8 out of 10 or 7 out of 10 and then getting the ball on offense, or would you rather have the ball in your stick with the ability to score 2 or 3 out of 10? The difference between a 52 on a face-off and a 32 on a face-off is about 5% on scoring efficiency. So we keep our eye on the data because we've got to be on the right side of that. Emotionally, I think it has been as challenging as when the NBA launched a 24-second shot clock in the 50s. They went from no shot clock to 24. And for 5 years, everyone was like, you're crazy. Yep. We can't run our motion offense. You made the game too fast. And then what athletes and coaches do better than anyone else in any industry is they adapt. And the primary reason why we're looking at the clock, and by the way, not the position itself, I've been told, oh, why don't you just eliminate the clamp? And I actually don't want to mess with the discipline. I love the discipline. I love the ability for Trevor Baptiste to score 3 goals off of a draw like he did against the Water Dogs in Denver last year. That's dynamic as hell. Yeah. But what I have disliked about lacrosse is that it's the only team sport where possession is determined by players. And with a face-off, possession can be unequal. And a face-off that wins 52 seconds of every minute of a 12-minute quarter, if you're going 8 of 10, you can suffocate your opponent. So I think that has been our angle. We're going to continue to study this year and the results. Then we'll make a decision next year, but you got to have at least 2 years of run play. And then in the movie business, they call things happy accidents.
Yeah.
I do believe one of the happy accidents right now is the rule that we've implemented this year,
Yeah.
where if you have a long pole, you can't take a draw.
Yeah.
And that was primarily out of safety concerns because long poles will just stand up and hack. And then it also brought us all back to, man, I remember I played with Greg Grenley when he was an MVP, won 80% of the draws. It's largely why we were almost undefeated that season. Talk about suffocating your opponent. Teams would put a long pole out at him, and he would come back at halftime with these war wounds.
Insane.
And so, no different than a goalie stick having to start in the crease at a face-off. You got to have a short stick. I think that will protect the position and enhance the position.
So let me ask you
whether
this
we go back
question.
to a 52 clock or not.
Okay, but let me ask you this question. Based on what you're telling me, in that lacrosse is the only sport that doesn't have the alternative possession, would you be opposed to thinking in the future that there is potential and a possibility for alternative possession?
I think that has found its place in the championship series, and that makes sense under that format because the field's smaller and the pace of play, number of possessions. There's more possessions in a 32-minute game of sixes than there are in a 48-minute game of tens. More shot volume and stuff, so it makes sense there. As long as I'm here, I'll never get rid of the face-off in 10-on-10, and I'll never get rid of a long pole. I think it's part of what makes lacrosse unique.
Yeah.
But it's our job to sort of figure out things like, the crease dive and not having a goal mouth. And if you have a dominant face-off player, which, by the way, we live in a market where most teams do. And I don't think team sports should come down to possession inequality. I think everyone should have an equal chance and let the best players win. So that's how I'm thinking about it.
I live and breathe this sport 24 hours a day, 365. It's in my veins, right? Yeah. So I think of the potential of the PLL, and I think specifically to this draft class. And you've all pegged it the greatest draft. Yeah. I've bought into the greatest draft because I believe it is. I want to hear from you, though. Why do you think it's the greatest draft?
Well, I think we have generational talent and at all positions. I think that this is a core of players that have played in some cases 5 or 6 seasons, 6 years, I should say, because of the pandemic. So they're coming out older than previous classes. And that yields, I think, more skill, better athleticism as you mature and figure out how to move your body a little bit better, which was the case for me in the pro game. The other thing is commitment. We have guys that are coming to play lacrosse full-time. They're not looking to get a banking job. I mean, this is caliber talent that is committed to pro lacrosse like I was, like Harrison was, like many of sort of the top players have been.
When you put your thinking cap on, and your thinking cap on is on quite a bit. I know the way that you're wired.
I think too much.
What do you think of in terms of the future in the PLL 5-10 years from now that might look totally different than right now?
Well, if we're 5 years from now, we're out of the Olympics. There's a world where hopefully the Olympics does as well as we think it will, and then we're in Australia in 2032. But after the Olympics, I would anticipate a league where there are more than 8 teams with a home and away schedule. The season ending Labor Day weekend, an environment where there is no overlap with NLL, which we've been striving to get to, case in point this year with Brett Fruit and his team. Players getting paid on average over into the 6 figures. Mm-hmm. My hope is that in the next 10 or 15 years, players on average are getting paid $1 million or more. And this is not just thinking about it, it's modeling it. How do we get there? Through media, through sponsorship, through ticket sales, through investments. Tuesday, Thursday night games, and potentially teams that are governed by individual owners and not the league anymore.
You and your brother, Mike, have led the charge with the PLL, and the time, the effort, the management, the overseeing of so many moving parts. What's been the hardest thing for you?
Man, it's so hard every day. I would say the hardest thing has been dealing with the patience that's required to see this thing become the next UFC or MLS in America. And I know we have that ability. We've started from a place that they didn't, in way of a big fan base, a large participation cohort, and the sometimes frustrating thing for me is how do we mobilize them to embrace pro lacrosse more? We've got an incredible fan base that has enabled us to set records, but I know there are more lacrosse fans out there that can continue to push this thing. And the trickle-down effect of the PLL becoming the next UFC means the college game, whether it's NIL or college coaches getting paid more investment from universities, more teams in different conferences. The benefit means we go from 23 states that have lacrosse officially sanctioned to 50. And that costs local government money. There's only 23 states in America where we can wear our letter jackets in school because we have a game on the weekend. Yeah. The rest are club. There's so much room for this game to grow. We've started at a great place, but it really is going to require all of us to sort of lock arms and be like, this is good for league, this is good for sport. This is good for sport, this is good for league, this is good for college, this is good for my kids and their youth experience, this is going to be good for the Olympic Games and our path to getting into 2032 and 2036. So that would be my, not as much frustration, but my plea out there is like, we are a community that can make a difference in sports unlike anyone else.
In the coming weeks or throughout the season, you'll have your hands on all these rookies at one point in time, whether it's training camp in the middle of the season. I'm actually more interested in if you were to spend time with a 10-year-old Paul Rabil, a 10-year-old Paul Carcaterra that loved this sport and dreamed about this sport. What would you tell him?
Well, I would first take on what my dad did with me and make sure that I continue to play other sports. I fell in lacrosse probably when I was in love with lacrosse when I was 14. I started playing when I was 12. I wanted to quit. My mom kept me in it. I loved basketball and soccer. And in the winter, I didn't want to drop the basketball. In the spring, I didn't want to drop the lacrosse stick. In the fall, I didn't want to stop kicking the soccer ball. And my dad kept going, you need to keep doing all. And that was really helpful for me to grow into my potential as an athlete and to get exposure to different disciplines, different coaching styles, different teammates. So I think that would be number one. And then number two is when it is the spring and the summer and I am playing lacrosse, to go on YouTube, to go on ESPN Plus, to go on Instagram, find the player out there who is the best at what he or she does and just study them and have fun with it, right? Like what makes Tom Schreiber so great? What makes Trevor Baptiste so fantastic? You know, that type of ambition and connection and storytelling is what inspired me as an athlete. I watch Michael Jordan documentaries. I watch Barry Sanders, Reggie Bush, and all of that stuff led to my growth as a player. The thing that I would say, don't worry about social media. Don't worry about branding. Like, it might not be for you, but you've got the leagues and you've got the universities that are getting smarter and better at it, and they can help handle it. Steph Curry hated social media until his 10th year in the pros, where he was confident in his play, comfortable in what he could bring to camera, and then he started figuring it out. So leave the distractions.
This league is so strong from a social media perspective. What do you want to accomplish on that front?
Well, we want to continue to grow our audience. We want to be a platform that has tens of millions of followers. We know that when we started playing lacrosse, ESPN's MRI Simmons report said that there was 15 million fans in the U.S. Fast forward 6 years, they have now documented 46 million. So how do we convert those lacrosse fans to our daily programming on social? Social media has been an unlock for us, like television was to the NFL in the 60s, like radio was to Major League Baseball in the early 1900s. It's a new medium that gives us untethered, unique, and expansive access to our fan base, which tends to be younger than most sports, which is why I think we do a pretty good job with sponsors. They want the next generation of young lacrosse players out there. So growing audience, continuing to tell really good stories, diving more deeply into our players' stories, show their human experiences. And then I would say continue to innovate, whether it's new tools that Meta's putting out or live streams. We can't, in my estimation, ever lose that that ability to break shit, which is what we would always lean into when we launched the league. Do you remember when we had our weekly SiriusXM satellite show?
Of course, man.
It was called the Lacrosse Show.
Yes.
With Carc and Rabil.
Yeah, we covered everything A to Z.
Yeah, and that was when MLL was cooking.
Yep.
And I would have conversations with you about what it was like being a player on the field, but we'd also talk high-level sports stuff, and one of which is coaching.
Coaching, and that when I think of coaching in the PLL right now, the first thing that comes to mind was Bill Tierney jumping on to coach the Philadelphia Water Dogs. No coach in the history of NCAA lacrosse has more national titles than Bill Tierney. 6 with Princeton, 1 with Denver. What was your reaction when pen went to paper and you were able to get this guy?
I'll give you some tea first. Do you know who Bill went to for his defensive coordinator position? Bill Belichick. Almost got him.
No way.
Almost got him.
You're kidding.
Well, he went to him.
Did he?
Yeah.
You made him say no?
Yeah, he made him say no. Bill Tierney is the Bill Belichick of lacrosse.
Yes.
And from a thought exercise standpoint, I remember coming into pro lacrosse in 2008 and so desperately wanting the Dave Petramala experience that I had at Hopkins.
Yep.
I also knew that those guys, the college guys, their life is lacrosse. And we had an injection of that in the early days with Tony Seaman, with Dave Cottle, and no secret, their programs won. And when we came out of the gates with a Dom Starja and even a Chris Bates and Andy Copeland and Andy Towers, these are all college lacrosse coaches. So the shift, I think, from secondary to primary talent has happened over the last 5 to 10 years. But you have those watershed moments when you get the talent of talents, and that was Bill Tierney. I am really excited to see what the vibe on the sidelines will be when he's out there. Because one of the things about Coach T is not only is he great from an X's and O's standpoint, but he's an intimidator.
Yes.
It's like the Dean Smith story when Coach K first came into Duke. Dean Smith walked across the scores table and smacked the table. And he just sort of commanded, like, welcome to the ACC. Yep. This is my show. And then when Bill Guthridge came in, after Dean Smith stepped down, Coach K walked over there and smacked the table.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see a little bit of that.
If you were to give him some advice, and I mean like real advice, and when I think of advice, I don't think of it in a controversial way, but maybe something that you're not too certain about that could help him based on who he is, what he's walking into, what would it be?
Coaching 28 to 35-year-olds with families that some of them, by the way, like a John Galloway or Connor Busick, have the best coaching minds in the game too. It's a different relationship. I know that was something that Dom Starja was sort of like, wow. And even my time playing with Team USA, whether it was Coach Pressler, who's now with Atlas, or Petro when he came over in 2014, and then Dino, is they're like, man, you guys are like really fit and skilled. It's almost like they didn't know what was going into it. But there's the psychology, and I think that Bill is very aware of that. And we'll see the type of tact that he takes into the locker room. You know, one of the things that we saw on ESPN and through social media with Coach Pressler is his approach to the locker room for the New York Atlas was the same as it was to Duke. And you're talking about different players at different moments of their life. So I would anticipate Coach Pressler to evolve, Andy Copeland evolved from year 1 to year 2. And it's a delicate balance because you're not stepping off the gas. You're just going, okay, I'm Phil Jackson now, and I need to be a pure player coach.
We talk about relationships a lot, and I'm curious to get your unfiltered response with this. You were in a locker room just a couple years ago with these guys.
Yeah.
Playing, competing, teammates, opponents. And now you're in this position where all hands on deck, you're running this league. That's not the easiest thing. Yeah. What's been the hardest part about transitioning for you?
Well, I miss the locker rooms. You know, I think that was the best part of my playing experience, the huddles, the moments after goals, the moments when you're on the defensive end having given up a goal, like people just coming together. It's this very raw experience of emotion and physicality. I love to play with heightened focus, intensity, anger. That was what got the best out of me. And, you know, that's not conducive to the workplace. Yeah. So that part I am missing and will always miss. But we have our versions of wins and championship games as well. It's one of the cool things about running a league is that we are in it, hip to hip with our teams. Playoffs are around, we're fired up. Opening weekend, fired up. Championship game, we wanted the absolute best championship game for our fans and players as possible. We have our pre-game or our pre-weekend meetings. We have our post-game, post-weekend meetings. So try to keep that culture as much as I can, but I can't suit up and hit you. Like I want to tackle you right now. Right? Couldn't do it. You'd sue me.